Hey guys, you're listening to Totally Stoked podcast with Amelia Travis, yoga teacher and wild child turned multi-six-figure business coach, writer, speaker, and spiritual warrior. Totally Stoked is an experiment in radical honesty. On this show, there's only two rules: show up and tell the truth. Each week, we share uncensored, truth-telling, shame-busting conversations with thought leaders, entrepreneurs, visionaries, and modern-day mystics, revealing their Rise to Thrive stories, current challenges, and sharing their most powerful tools for awakening, growth, and well-being. This is your place to let down your guard, open your heart, and remember that being human is a crazy, wild ride, but you don't have to do it alone. So buckle up, baby, because we're heading full speed ahead to radical self-love and a totally stoked life. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Totally Stoked podcast. I am beyond stoked to share this guest with you today. This is someone who's been very important to me, very special in my life, and it might make him feel awkward to hear that because he did not know. But he was someone who was divinely appointed and arrived in my life when I was going through one of the greatest spiritual challenges and spiritual growth periods that I have experienced in my life to date. My guest today is an ex-evangelical vocational pastor and self-proclaimed spiritual nomad with a passion for connecting people. He's a good shepherd for seekers, piecing together a spiritual identity after leaving exclusive faith traditions. The founder of Spiritual Nomad podcast, he's working on creating a collaborative faith community that strives for the common good in our communities and leads all of us towards a better, whole, and healed version of not just ourselves, but the world. Welcome to the show, Luke Bricker. Hi.
Thank you so much. Such kind words.
You are so inspiring to me. And I want to just throw out his Instagram right out the gate here, you guys. Go check out at the _spiritual_nomad on Instagram. Every single day, this guy is serving up and dishing out thought-provoking content that really helps me to expand in self-awareness and spiritual awareness and just reframe some of the what I've considered pillars of my spirituality for many years. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being that person for me.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, I don't know, man. I was just doing it.
Just doing the thing,
So tell us a little bit about you. What's your background? You're in California now. You're a vocational pastor. You also have a day job. How did you get here? We're going to be talking about deconstructing and reconstructing spirituality on our own terms, but I'd love to hear a little bit about where you came from and who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a pastor's kid and was born into a church plant. For a lack of a better term, it's just like a church startup. And my dad's been a church planter with a particular church movement called the Vineyard, and they're kind of more charismatic, if any of your listeners are familiar with that term. Mm-hmm. And so I was born into church and Christianity and spirituality, and even more of like a transcendent sort of spirituality. That'd be probably my word, not necessarily the word used in the circle that I've come from, but really in a place that is more open to a very spiritual side of Christianity. So I'm thankful for that. But as I grew up, my dad became more influenced by evangelicalism, a lot of the Western church, mega church mentality. Mm-hmm. His favorite people are like, Rick Warren, who wrote like The Purpose-Driven Life, if people are familiar with that. So Andy Stanley, Bill Hybels, for if people, come from the Midwest. So Chicago, if people are familiar with that area. So it became a lot less about spirituality and about Holy Spirit stuff, and more so just about sheer just church growth and good kind of like early TED Talk stuff that was happening, in the late 90s, early 2000s. So that's the environment that I grew up in, is very, organizational mindset of church, less sort of a spiritual faith community. So for me, I grew up in that. I didn't want anything to do with church, actually, in my teen years. So I've always kind of rebelled against all of that. Typical pastor's kid stuff, you know, like.
What does that mean? You were smoking weed and like hanging
Yeah,
out down at the corner store? Like, what was
yeah, that's
that?
actually exactly what was happening, you know?
Okay,
So,
cool.
yeah, all kind of this stuff that's like, where's Luke at? Yeah, like, with, some chick down
Mhm.
wherever and, smoking and whatever. So, and I was also like really I'm a musician. And so part of that was like the exposure to like the underground music scene. So that was kind of my life from like age 12 to like 20, 21. I was playing more in the heavier genre of music. And so I didn't want anything to do with church. As a matter of fact, when I was 15, my dad asked me kind of the standard dad question, like, hey, what do you want to do with your life? What are you thinking about? You're in high school now. And he's like, what would you think about taking over the church one day? And at that time, the church was about 3,000 people strong, 5 services on a weekend.
It's a big church.
Yeah, it was a big church, and they experienced a lot of growth. And I was at the time, I was like, yeah, that's ridiculous. I will never be a pastor or anything of the likes, period, ever. And so I kind of, wrote my own fate right there at 15.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the universe was like, yeah, that's funny. So fast forward around 21, I kind of had an experience where I was coming back into a desire for God and church and things like that. There was some time in my teen years that some unique things happened, but really started to experience a vocational call, if you will. I was then the youth pastor. So I became the youth pastor at the church, did that. And then at 26, and this is in Indianapolis, Indiana, mind you. So I'm very far from Oceanside at that point in
Mm-hmm.
time. And I wanted to move to San Diego and start a church of my own. I wanted to plant a church. And in reality, the pressure was really high to take over the church that I was being, a youth pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I just didn't want that. I had a lot of different values. I'm very different from my dad in many ways, more so on a theological level and even a practice level.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that if I was going to do anything there, it would just still be under like a heavy hand. And frankly, I just have never felt at home in the Midwest. I was born in Miami, and then when I was young, we moved to Indianapolis, and I don't know, I just never felt like that was right. And so I had a desire to move to Southern California, have some family here, and decided to come here to plant a church. And that's how I ended up here. And that's a little bit just the really brief piece of like the nuts and bolts of my story of how I ended up 3 blocks away from you right now recording this.
So Luke, when you were growing up in the church, did you believe in Jesus? And let me just have you answer that. Did you believe in
Sure.
Jesus?
Um, well, of course, because that was what I was born into, not to mention being just simply born in America, in the Midwest, growing up in the Midwest even, and then my dad is a pastor. Like, sure, I believed in Jesus and had to come to terms with that on my own, even at a young age. But, yeah. I mean, I sincerely did from a young age, and then really became very passionate about believing in Jesus in my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Conservatively, a Jesus follower, and really following a pretty rigorous tradition that's referred to as Calvinism in the Reformed Church. Your listeners may already be not stoked on hearing any more after that, but I've progressed from there. So,
So it'll be interesting because, like, as you know, I mean, we only connected probably about a year ago. So you were not witnessing the year prior to that or the years prior to that. But I did not grow up. I grew up attending occasionally a Unitarian Universalist church, which is like a very
really,
liberal, very liberal Christian church, pretty liberal Christian church.
yeah,
Um,
you is definitely liberal for sure.
But my dad didn't dig church. My mom did, but it was always divided. I would go with my mom to church. My sister and my dad would stay home. And so I got confirmed and I got a Bible when I was like 8. And I was really excited about that because I had to memorize a piece of scripture, and I got to stand up on stage with the microphone. That was really what I was excited about. Let's be real. Yeah, I was like, amazing. And then after that, it was kind of like nothing. My teen years, I swung really hard against Christianity. And my perspective was, I was interested in Hinduism and Buddhism and, Wicca and anything else really besides Christianity. But I had this opinion that Christianity was extremely parochial. It was really narrow. It was really judgmental. And I was like, that's just not for me. And so it was a hard no. And then around 21, I was deep in the sugar baby, kind of almost borderline prostitution, drug addiction, really, really dark years. And I met somebody who asked me why I didn't believe in God. And I said, if God is real, why do I feel empty? And he was like, well, if you feel empty, it means that you could be filled. A glass isn't empty by definition unless it can be filled. So I went into a period of exploring the idea that there is a God, and that happened through prayer, through the hotline, right? And that led to me actually reading the Bible, and the Bible came alive to me, and I had a really powerful conversion experience, or I wouldn't even salvation experience, like with Jesus one-on-one in an empty hotel room. It was real. He was there, the whole thing.
Really?
And so I became a pretty devout believer. And what that looked like was, leading young life and kind of leading this dual life where I was still doing all this really dark stuff, but I was also showing up in a Foursquare church every Sunday, which was also a very charismatic church.
Totally.
Leading young life and just living this dual life. And to make a huge story very short, I always was kind of walking this razor's edge between evangelical, is exclusionary Jesus the real Jesus? Is Jesus really the only way? And feeling like my community and the other people around me were like, yes, Jesus is the only way. Anything else you're hearing or believing or seeing is demonic. This is the only way. And so I actually was, in that for kind of a long time, and it ebbed and flowed over the years. But the year before I met you, I facilitated a 200-hour yoga teacher training called Spirit-Led Yoga. And what my vision in that was teaching the intersection of Christian theology and yoga philosophy, drawing on some of the stuff Paramahansa Yogananda has done and my own experience as well. But what ended up happening was a really fearful environment that was people, wanting to fit a square peg in a round hole, and people not wanting to learn about certain aspects of yoga, but wanting to just kind of appropriate what works for us and cover it all under Jesus. So I'm fascinated. And to all my listeners, I love you guys and I hope you're interested, but I'm here to have this conversation regardless, because for me, this idea of deconstructing and reconstructing our own faith, it does eventually lead to where maybe for some people, it really does fit in a particular box and it really does work for them and everything lines up and they can read every piece of scripture from the Bible and it works and it aligns. That wasn't the case for me. And part of the reason that I was so attracted to you and to your story is how can we have this deep, abiding, real relationship with the person of Jesus and Jesus the Christ, and then also have this awakening of our own spiritual autonomy and agency and authority that doesn't seem to line up with so much scripture. And for me, that was compounded by being a woman. You know what I mean? Hey, totally. What is going on here? How can I have this relationship with God that I know is real and have it in this framework of Western Christianity, but then that oppresses me?
Yeah, 100%.
So I don't know much about, Calvinism or the Reformation, but I want to hear a little bit more. I want to back up and hear a little bit more about the early church that you were involved in, because you said it was charismatic. And I think that's important in the context of what you're experiencing in life now.
Yeah.
For people who don't know what a charismatic church is, will you enlighten us as to what that term usually means?
Yeah. So simply stating a charismatic church, and the word, charisma is just to be, filled with the Spirit, right? So it's just meaning that somebody is passionate. They're in tune to some would say a spirit within, as I would say, or some would say a spirit that is around that will come in and fill us. Charismatic churches are very Holy Spirit led. They're less concerned about, if people are doing the rightness of like an Orthodox church service, or they're less concerned about the person preaching the Bible if they have all the right degrees. Rather, if somebody has an anointing on them, or a power about them, that's pretty much like the main license in a charismatic church. So yeah, charismatic churches are unique in their own because they are certainly Western Christian products. However, they still have a rootedness and a groundedness to a spirituality that is fluid and flexible. And so I find myself actually, ironically, within the past month, revisiting a lot of my charismatic Christian roots, just because once you begin to explore more of an Eastern understanding of spirituality, you begin to see a little bit more of a correlation. And a lot of it comes down to me just for semantics. So, yeah.
Yeah. And for those who, and I love how careful and thoughtful you are with your answers. And I'm going to be the one that is less of that. So I'll just say, take this with a big grain of salt. But some of the more, I would say, negatively stereotyped things that might be associated with a charismatic church would be like holy rollers, or
Yes.
what is the thing? Being slain in the Spirit, or, there's things that are associated with that where people are having these really powerful spiritual experiences that are mystical or less able to be explained by rational thought.
Yeah.
And that definitely, it can go a lot of different ways. But one of the things that was part of my walk was in a more charismatic church. At the age of 26, I received my first prophetic word.
Yeah.
And it was a really pivotal experience that actually changed the entire course of my life. And it was when I was really struggling with, how can I love yoga and love yoga philosophy and be a yoga teacher and also love Jesus? I don't know how to do it. You know what I mean? I don't know how to. And I was in this church in Florida and I was praying. I'd never been to the church before. A friend took me there. I was just visiting, and it was like this really funky church. I thought it was funky. I had
okay, all charismatic churches are going to be
weird,
funky.
right? There were people with flags and
waving
banners. It was weird. And I was like, this is weird. And we're doing a lot of worship, and it was a lady pastor, which I thought was interesting. And we were singing for a really long time, and it was like, I don't know, we were singing that's song or something. And
I really should have identified charismatic churches by the negative, by the way, too. That probably would have been a little bit more helpful. So,
well, I think it's good to have a little bit of both, you know what I mean? Because I was in there going, this is really weird. I've never been in a space like this, but I'm just going to trust my friend that brought me here and trust that God brought me here and just whatever, feel it out. So I kind of went into my own meditative prayer. And the prayer was just like, how do I do this, God? And I just want to love you. Ultimately, the prayer was, God, I just want to love you. I just want to serve you. I just want to be the woman that you want me to be. I just want to love you. I just want to love you. And it almost became like a mantra, and I was repeating it over and over. And then I hear you, and my eyes are closed and I'm praying, and I'm like, well, she's not talking to me. And then I hear you in the peach shirt, and I'm like, not talking to me. My shirt's coral. You know what I mean? And I hear you, and my neighbor elbows me, and I open my eyes, and there's it wasn't a huge service. There's probably 200 people in the church, but there's enough people that she was pointing at me from across the room, and I was pretty far back. And she said, there's a desire that's burning on your heart right now. There's something that you want to do so badly, and you feel like you just don't know how. And God wants you to know that it's time to set down your fears. It's time to set down your baggage and just move into it. The favor of the Lord is upon you. Move into it. It's time to let it go. Yeah. Move into it, right? And the third time she said move into it, something broke in me, not in a bad way, but it was like something shifted, and I just started bawling. And it was like I had perceived for years that there was this block above my head, and it was very specifically like a block above my head, which now, of course, drawing on yogic traditions, I would say seventh or even eighth chakra blockage, right? Depends on what tradition you draw from, which is the connection to the divine, the awareness that we have access to the indwelling Holy Spirit, if you want to use whatever language. Sure. And that broke. And all of a sudden, I just knew that the only thing that had been standing in between me and loving God this way and serving God this way was myself and just my own perception of unworthiness. And that experience changed the entire course of my life. That happened literally. I called my husband that night. I was like, this is what happened. I feel like I'm supposed to start my business. And he was like, okay, why don't you just sleep on it? My husband is not into, my husband's church is the ocean. He's just surfing is his church. And he was like, okay, why don't you just sleep on it? And if you wake up with a yes, then like, we'll go for it. I prayed, I went to bed, I woke up, and like the first word resounding in me was just yes. And so that was literally the start of my business and of everything that I'm doing now, was this word that was spoken over me. So wow. However you look at that, there's so much power in these charismatic experiences, right? In these spiritual experiences. So I think what I want to know is, like, people would say, is that real? And I don't think that's the right question, but do you think that there's power in that kind of experience, and why? Yeah. Why does that
Well, I've had similar experiences myself that are pretty much the anchors that keep me coming back to any sort of spirituality, that we're in charismatic experiences, falling out in the spirit, speaking in tongues. That's a phenomenon that still happens. Getting a tangible sense of a spirit from head to toe that was actually happening to me as you're sharing your story. And I'm like seeing the divine in your eyes while you're telling it, right? And like that.
Oh, now it's on me. Yay.
And that is divine love. And that is wholeness and oneness with God. And so for me, it's like, exactly, the question is not, is this real or not? But in those settings and in those places, the only issue that I have is that immediately things begin to can be manipulated, can be manipulative, can be control. And immediately there is a sense of, now this person has some sort of dominance or authority over you if they gave you that word. And if you are connected, they may want to try to steer you afterwards. And in my opinion, the whole idea of gospel or good news is liberation and freedom. And so that's the antithesis of that, right? If somebody is helping you feel liberated, like what happened, and then they come in and try to be some sort of manipulation and, you know, control authority figure, then essentially they're acting in an antichrist way, right? But yeah, I'm not sure if I'm getting to the brass tacks of what.
Yeah. So, okay. So here, I want to hear, when you moved out to California, you wanted to plant a church. In your little questionnaire that we have, it says it crashed pretty quickly. I want to hear about the crash. What happened?
Yeah. And so just a little like, you know, pretext to that is just simply like, I was in a place where I was really conservative in my theology about God and how people were, quote, saved, and had a lot of there's still sermons on the internet if you really want to find them, of me preaching some.
Oh, I'm totally gonna go find them.
Yeah, they get better, but like, it was definitely like, I mean, really repulsive now as I look back. You know what I mean? But that's just part of the journey. That's the trajectory. That's what it is. So I initially wanted a church plant because I had what I felt like was like a mandate from God that people were going to be separated from God for all of eternity if I wasn't going to live into this calling to go help bring some sort of salvation. So I've certainly progressed past all of that. If you want to slap a title on me, it'd be, you know, Christian universalist for sure. But at that time, it wasn't. So mission was completely connected to calling for people's individual salvation, right? And so I moved to California, or I wanted to move out here because I had a unique experience and a unique vision. Okay. So not, you know, too different than what was happening in your experience. So
will you tell us about it?
Yes. In 2013, I was here. I was in Anaheim, actually. So we came to San Diego. My wife, her sister, and her brother-in-law lived in San Diego down in Point Loma. And then we were visiting before a conference for our movement. We drove up to Anaheim for the conference, and I was outside, and they had a youth tent area with, I don't know, a few thousand youth kids and worship. And then inside was where all the adulting was happening, right? So I went out to the youth tent for music because it was just way better. And I was like, the Vineyard is kind of stuck in 1980s still. So it was like super lame, cheesy, like guitar solos and stuff. And I'm like, whatever. So this was more like engaging, interactive music, at least. In that time, in 2013, I was still in a pretty conservative understanding in my theological understanding. And I had a vision pop into my mind, which happened from time to time. So it was familiar enough. And I felt like God was calling me to be in Southern California because he was, I say he, I don't mean to say he, it's out of habit, but
It's fine.
It, universe, whatever you would like to say, was calling me to be a part of a new move, a new wave of God that was going to happen here in Southern California and impact essentially the whole world. And I had this vision. Even at the airport, and you see, like, if you're flying international, like the little plane with the little dots behind it or whatever, you can see where you're going, you know? And I just had this vision of in Southern California was a hub, and it was moving out and going to all the world, a complete newness and wave of the divine that was going to start here. So we came back from Anaheim, and actually later that night too, somebody prayed for me, and I began to like fall out in the spirit, which is essentially like a tangible sensation of God, spirit, universe, whatever that is. It literally just feels like it's too much for my physical body. So my body just needs to kind of lay down, right? That's the most like practical way I can say it. I go back in 2013. I tell my dad, hey, I want to move to San Diego and start a church. It's like, well, that's great, but I kind of like need you here. And so from 2013 to 2016 was a process of me moving to San Diego. Now, in that time was a major shift in my thinking about myself, about God, about everything. It was the quintessential, like, quote, deconstruction time that started in 2015. I started to revisit authors like Rob Bell, who were considered heretics in my movement. And now he's kind of like PG compared to the stuff that I like, you know? So I moved out here to plant the church, but it kind of shifted at that point. I actually looked at it as my only sort of like get out of jail free card. Because I had a, quote, distinct calling to be a pastor and a church leader, but nothing else is acceptable in the church world to go and move from your hometown, you know, other than starting a new faith community. So I kind of used that, you know, as a way out of my current situation that I was in to take over this church. I moved to San Diego in March of 2016. We decided we landed in San Marcos. You're familiar with it for sure. So we moved right next to CSU in San Marcos, and came out here. I had a home. I sold my house. I loaded up a moving truck. I had a couple motorcycles I put in there and a car that we trailered. I drove out,
and
put all of our stuff.
Two little babies then, right?
Two little babies. So I had a 6-month-old son and a daughter that just turned 2. And I had no job lined up. I had no apartment lined up. I didn't have anything at all planned out because 7 life, Enneagram 7, right? So
God bless your wife. God bless Lindsay.
She's a 6 too. Well, she's a 6. She has a heavy 7 wing, you know, and she's a counterphobic 6. If we want to riff on that. If something scares her, she's gonna like jump into it just because she has to. So it was certainly like fearful, but she's always like trusted me. We've been together since we were both 17 years old. So I mean, it's been, you know, definitely a wild ride for her. But I moved out here and dumped all my stuff and literally jumped on my motorcycle riding around town to find a job in an apartment. And I had like 5 days to do it before I flew back to get my family, you know, and whenever we all moved out here, I got a job. I was selling motorcycles in Vista and working dealership hours, which are very long. And after some time, I just became like really dry. And I was like, man, I want to get out of sales because it's taking up my life. And I just thought, even though I'm in this deconstruction, even though I'm having a complete reshape and reshifting of who I think God is and what this all is. And mind you, I thought the church was just, I don't know if you can cuss on your podcast,
You can
but
cuss. It's bullshit. Yeah.
it was just full of shit, man. And it was really fucked. So I was like, I'm here trying to start.
Perfect time to start a church.
Yeah, perfect time. I'm like, okay, like, yeah, I actually hate all things church. Why should I start one? But that's what I came here to do. We went back to visit for my sister's wedding in July. So we'd only lived here for a few months. I had a friend who played guitar and could sing, and he was kind of involved in the church. And I was like, hey, man, I know you don't have a job and you live at your dad's house. And he was older than me even. So I'm like, why don't you like move out to San Diego and you do some worship, some music, I'll do some message. Let's just market the shit out of this thing and like get a church going, you know? Mm-hmm. And so 2 weeks later, he's driving across the country in his 96 Honda Accord that he got from his grandma. And, you know, everything he owned in it, which was like 2 guitars and a computer, you know, and like literally 4 articles of clothing or something. And we moved from a 2,100 square foot home to a 900 square foot apartment. And then my very large friend, who's like 6'3" and like 280 pounds, comes moving into our living room. And we started I quit my job. And I was like going all in with starting this church. And I had to make it work because I was I needed that for an income, for a life. My whole training had been vocational ministry, you know, and as much as I wanted to like go into sales, I learned very quickly that I'm just not cut out for like 10-hour days on a sales floor. And we started this church, and I quit my job. We were handing out flyers and doing, you know, Facebook advertising and trying to get people to come. We rented the little like movie theater that was in my apartment complex, like lobby. And he did some worship. We invited some friends. About a dozen people came September. So 2016. So it's been a few years ago now. And it all went fine. And just like all of the classes that I've taken about starting a church, it was all on trajectory to become something really cool and really neat. Except for I woke up the next morning after we've done a couple of these services, and I just knew, like deep in my soul, like, you know, this isn't right. You know, it's not the right time, and you're going to build something that you don't believe in if you're not careful. And my friend was wanting to move back to Indiana anyways, for whatever obscure reason you would want to do that. And so he ended up moving back. We shut that church down, and I went into probably from about October, so about this time 3 years ago, until February of 2017, just a really deep, dark depression. I was living on savings. I didn't have a job. I was literally wallowing in a dark apartment for months. And the only thing that really saved me essentially was connecting in meditation. So I began to start meditating in mid-January and really taking that seriously. And contemplative prayer in the Christian tradition is what it would be called. And centering prayer, a lot of Richard Rohr's stuff. You know, I bought The Naked Now and started reading that. And I just had a complete paradigm shift, and that's how Richard Rohr would define salvation, right? So I had a paradigm shift, and I had a deep sense of connectivity that the divine's never, ever been removed from me. And she has always been there the whole time. As much of this depression and self-sabotage that I'm experiencing, that had not taken away from my acceptance or love or wholeness or anything the whole time. And that's whenever I started the Spiritual Nomad podcast, because I started venturing into then more of an Eastern understanding of spirituality from that point. So I was a late bloomer to a lot of Hinduism and Buddhism and things of that nature. But, Ram Dass has been really integral for me. A lot of the teachers, and then obviously us being in North County, Yogananda with Self-Realization Fellowship in Encinitas. So, but that was really my coming out here and utterly failing, and also being like wildly broke and burning through all my profits from my house sale, and just really feeling like there's nothing for me, and it's just really bizarre to see now how things have turned around, and I'm sitting in a church where I'm working at now, so it's like super far out,
Yeah, I have to say, when you were speaking about the vision that you had in Anaheim, I was lit up head to toe, chills. That vision is still coming, Luke. Like,
I love it.
It's still coming, and it's just different than you thought.
Yes.
And that's really cool, because it was like I was lit up with chills. I had tears in my eyes. Like, it was like, yes, like that expansion, that going out from here and reaching all of these different people and places of the world. I mean, how old are you now? 30 something?
So I am 29. I'll be 30 in November 2nd, was a couple weeks away. So
okay, you probably have 50 more years of figuring it out and serving on the planet, and like how cool that is. I mean, when you look at like, this is what has happened in 3 years, like what could happen in 50, you know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, like, and we talk about these people, like Richard Rohr and like Ram Dass, and like, these are spiritual leaders who were willing to walk in the way Jesus walked, who are willing to say, yep, you know what I know experientially in myself may not be what is acceptable in this doctrine or in this dogma or in this orthodoxy or in this box or in that building or whatever. Yeah. But I know it, right? And that's what contemplative faith brings, and that's what meditation brings. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, as you started diving into your meditation practice, first kind of there's so many different ways of meditating. So like, what did your meditation practice look like? And as things started to shift, what happened? How did you know that the meditation was working, so to speak?
Totally.
Air quotes.
Well, so really quick too, just on the age piece, on that same Anaheim trip in 2013, I met with a leader from the East Coast and explained to them my desire to start a church and plant the church. And he told me, hey man, you're really young. You have a lot of time. And even kind of said, frankly, like, not too many people are going to take a mid 20-year-old pastor seriously. So, and he told me he was part of a church called Hillsong. They do a lot of like,
stuff. Hillsong's huge.
Yeah. So he was part of like Hillsong, New York's church plant and stuff. And he said, hey, one of my mentors told me that your 20s is just like, if you think it's just a runway to like lift off your life at 30, and you just do everything, explore, experiment, whatever, nothing matters. Just, figure it out, and you'll have some sort of trajectory when 30 comes. And now I'm like 10 days away from 30 or whatever, or a little bit more than that. But at any rate, I'm approaching 30, and I'm like, he was so right. And it's this full circle thing. But for the meditation, for me, it was just a very simple mindfulness piece at first. Kind of the most stereotypical, like when you're at the checkout line and some magazine says like meditation, and it's like very just like, oh, just if a thought comes into your mind, release it, And
so just like sitting and breathing and watching your thoughts.
Just watching your thoughts. Very, grassroots, elementary meditation, right? And what happened though, the way that I knew that it was true is that I realized all of these thoughts, all of these things is my ego. This is the false self. This is the projections of me. These are not realities or even truths. And as I begin to allow those to, like I always give the illustration of, if I'm sitting by a river, I'm just observing the things that are flowing down. I'm observing the water flow down. If I see a leaf, I observe the leaf flow down the river. And I just began to do that with all of my hopes and dreams and expectations and financial situation. just allowing that to release and to be gone. And what I sensed was what I'd not at that point had experienced in a long time. And it's exactly what we've been talking about in this chat, is like this lighting up feeling, this tangible spirit of God feeling that we get, that almost feels like, only way I can explain it's like a cold chill throughout your whole body, but it's distinctively different than a cold chill, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And for the first time in years, I had not felt that in a long time, because I'd really gotten away from any sort of Holy Spirit stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And once I got down and understood that the true self is still down there, the day that I had a realization that Christ is deep in me,
Mm-hmm.
like everything from head to toe just came alive.
Mm.
And I was like, oh man, like this is it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, essentially, it's like what I've been looking for is who I've always been. It's just all like the shit I've dumped on top of it, and, illusions, essentially. So I realized that Christ in me is actually the hope of glory, to use a Pauline phrase, and that is any sort of hope for glory in our life. Those are very, Elizabethan feeling terms now at this point, but any sort of hope that we have, or any sort of feeling of fullness and alignment that we have, is only after the realization and recognition of the deep Christ that is inherent to everything, everyone, everywhere, all the time. And that's what meditation did for me. It awakened me back to that true essence of who I am,
Yeah. So I want to talk about and ask about some of the more challenging questions. And the reason is, I know that there still are a lot of my listeners who are in their relationship with Jesus in a way that where some of this stuff is pushing the envelope, or is maybe activates a little bit of fear or a little bit of discomfort. One of the things for me that's been true basically throughout my coming to Jesus, like exploration of faith and spirituality, that I've always really struggled with, was the exclusionary principle of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is the only way to the Father is through Jesus, right? Now, part of the reason that was hard for me is, as I started studying Vedanta when I was, I started studying yoga when I was 17. I had the salvation experience with Jesus at 21. And then since then, it's just been this ongoing process of trying to reconcile this non-dual perspective of Vedanta, in which if you're like, what is Vedanta? I don't know what that means. It's a philosophy in which all roads lead to the mountaintop, if you will, right? Like there's no wrong path to access the divine, because ultimately there's only oneness. There's only one, there's a singularity, and the singularity is God, and is the foundation of all being, and is us, and blah, 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 right? Then there's, within the Christian tradition, there's very much duality, right? There's us and there's God, and God is holy, which means set apart. And the bridge is Jesus, right? So we have to have this acceptance of a man who was fully man and fully God. And when we say, okay, yep, I believe you are the only way, then we're okay. And then right? So the exclusionary principle never worked for me. And and then the principle of hell, it never worked for me. I was never able to get on board with the idea that my husband, for example, is going to hell, right? And even before we got married, his father, who is really strong Baptist, his dad and stepmom sat us down and said, why are you going to marry him to me? You're unequally yoked. Did you know that? And I was like, so pissed, Luke. I was like, check it out. I'll go wherever he's going. Like, I'll yoke myself to him and we'll go wherever we're going together. You know what I mean? Never mind that, like, scripturally, like, from a theological perspective, he's sanctified through me if I'm a believer, whatever. All of that aside, I was like, how rude, you know what I mean? So I think the question that I'm getting to is, like, for those who are still in, and that sounds condescending, for those who right now are fully in belief that Jesus is the only way, and that, we're at risk, we've fallen away, and we're also leading others astray. How do you, with compassion, speak to that person.
Yeah.
Asking for a friend. JK,
Yeah.
asking for myself.
Well, it's really hard because, and I'm only speaking from experience, any sort of compassion usually is not reciprocated in those settings. It becomes for instance, I had a altercation with my dad, who, as now you've caught on, is a pastor and a firm believer and got saved in the Jesus People movement back in the 70s, which is really interesting if you ever want to Google that. And he was in Hollywood, California with his cousin and had a unique salvation experience, right? And so he's like deeply committed his life to getting people to come to a sense of salvation through Jesus being the only way.
He's winning souls.
Exactly. Winning souls.
More jewels in the crown in heaven.
Yes, with every eye bowed and every eye bowed, with every eye closed and every head bowed, raise your hand and I see you in the back. And, and yeah, so I get it. So I had an altercation with my dad. I was on the phone with him after the church plant didn't go well. And I was trying to figure out my life and all of this. And I started the podcast and word got back to my dad through the telephone game that I said that the Apostle Paul was full of shit. And I said, well, I mean, when you're speaking and communicating, there's always things that, are missed in translation. And maybe you're saying something you don't really mean to say. And I said, but be assured, I do think at times Paul was full of shit. And he was a Pharisee trying to work out his own demons, right? So at any rate, that's another conversation for another time. But we then got into a conversation then about Jesus and the Christ. And, we got in a pretty heated argument. And then finally I just said, like, hey, like, regardless of what we think about all of this theologically and what we think about God, like, I'm your son and like, you're hurting my feelings right now. Like, this is not acceptable to like talk to me like this, because he was just very, gritting teeth essentially over the phone, if you could see that sort of thing. And he said, well, I'm sorry, but I've built my life around this truth. Oh, that's what it is. I said that substitutionary atonement theory. And the only thing that means is that when Christ died and Jesus died on the cross, his blood paid a debt for our sins, that God essentially thinks that all human beings suck and they need to go to hell unless Jesus, quote, blood can cover their debt, right? And I said, that's a theory.
It rests on the principle of our brokenness and inherent sin, right? Which that's a whole different conversation.
Different time. And, I believe in original blessing. And so essentially I started talking about that. And to him, I was defiling his whole belief system of Jesus having to be the only way for God to look at me, to look at me as worthy and acceptable, right? And so I began to go to more of the compassionate side and just say, hey, like, I think we should probably take a breath and like just talk about this. And he was essentially like, no, like, this is it for me. I tell that story because sometimes the people that are the most connected to us in our life, that hold deep convictions, are sometimes going to be the most difficult people to give compassion to and receive that. So whenever people still have that sense, I tell them, for you, that's right. I mean, if you believe that Jesus is the only way and you believe that his blood seems kind of barbaric, but that his blood is the only thing that will make you holy and right, like, I will respect you enough to hold to that and to keep that. And, I really am a firm believer in Paul's saying because he wasn't completely full of shit, but, as long as it depends on you, live at peace with all people. And so if me, and I think that the gospel is freedom and liberation, you can be freed and liberated to believe that. And if you're a listener that is listening to this, then I think that if that brings you the most wholeness and peace, that's absolutely fine. The problem that I have now is with the proselytizing that comes after that conviction, right? Because now there's a sense that I have to believe that too, based on your consensus of what this old book is saying that was put together by a bunch of just, authority hungry, politicians.
Mm-hmm.
But, so.
Well, and I want to comment on that because that's really important. It is this conversation around the authority of scripture, right? Like, and
Totally.
that's often the central argument. And I'll just share, with great respect, that I live right next to a church. It's a church that moved in July of last year. We moved in around the same time. They moved in a couple weeks after, and I had been praying for a home church. Literally, those are my words. God, send me a home church.
You still have that like Christian thing deep down in there.
It's in there. And I'd been praying for, I was in the spirit-led yoga. I was teaching that 200-hour training. My partner in that was she was really very conservative. And it was, I was doing a lot. I was in an experience of idolatry. I'm going to be honest, of making her, in a sense, like above me, like a god, you know what I mean? And her, totally. and I'm not good enough, or I don't know, or whatever. So anyway, I've been praying for a home church. This church moves in. Literally, I live in the pastor's house, and I rent it separately from the church, right?
So far out that you're in the parsonage of a church. And
yeah. I'm looking at the church right now. So anyway, I attended this church for about 6 months after I came home from my spirit-led yoga training. And after I did that training, much like after you planted your church, I went into a really deep depression. And it was this sense of like, okay, that wasn't it. You know what I mean? I thought that was it, and that wasn't it. And I was being told that I'm a heretic, and that I'm leading people, that, that I'm consorting with demons and all of this stuff. And I was like, that sucks, because I know I'm not, like, but whatever, like, that's what you think. So, okay. So I came home and I was like, please God, just anything but a Baptist church, just not Baptist. Anything else is fine. I'll take it. So anyway, I come home and there's this church next door, and sure enough, they're affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. And so I started going to church because I love to worship. I just love to sing. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to worship. Like, that's very meaningful to me. Yes. And I experience God in that. And there's other traditions, like you look at Kundalini yoga, and the nod, the essence of all sound, vibration, is the foundation of all things. It makes sense that we're more in musical vibration, that we feel God. Like, it makes sense. But anyway, I digress. So I joined the church. I became a member of the church.
When was this? A year ago?
Yeah, last.
Oh my gosh.
So I became a member of the church, and I go for about 6 months. And Christmas Eve, last October, I was at a women's retreat. It was my 33rd birthday. And I set the intention on my 33rd birthday for integration. And I said this prayer: God, I want integration. I want to integrate the divine masculine and divine feminine. I want to integrate everything I've learned so far. And I didn't even really know what I was praying for, but this was what I was praying for, is integration. And this was probably a month before I found you on social media.
Yeah.
And I had this incredibly powerful divine feminine experience. And what that looked like for me was being surrounded by 10 women sitting around a bonfire, spontaneous song erupting from us that was ancestral, that felt, and I have Holy Spirit on me as I say this, that
me
felt
too.
So true and so real. And I'm just crying, and I'm digging my fingers into the earth and into the grass and apologizing to the mother, because I was like, I have neglected you, and I have not. I'm so in love with the Father. I'm so in love with, with God the Father, and I've just neglected you. And to me, the Holy Spirit is a much more feminine energy, right? Yes. And even the old pronouns for the Holy Spirit were feminine pronouns. If you look at the oldest text, so you're
onto it. You already know,
right? So I'm in this prayer, and I have this experience, and it's like divine feminine awakening, basically. And after that, it was like my theological framework and my religious framework just kind of shattered. Like, it was like, oh shit, right? Like, what about the women, right? Yeah. What about the women? And then that undid Genesis for me. Like, I was like, I don't know. It undid the symbology. It undid this idea about the serpent. Like, all of this stuff just started kind of coming apart and deconstructing. And I was like, okay, everything's unraveling. Like, you know what I mean? Like, am I losing my mind? Is this wrong? And so somehow I knew, like, I had this feeling of like, what's considered the most demonic yoga is Kundalini yoga, right? Yeah. But I got this sense of Kundalini yoga is also one that embraces most of the most feminine energy. And there's this correlation between in charismatic churches, baptism of the Holy Spirit. Some people say, well, it looks a lot like Kundalini awakening, right? There's these parallels that are drawn. And so,
oh man, there's so much we can talk about
so
that.
much, right? And so I was like, oh, we're gonna have to have another chat. But so I prayed about it and I felt like God was like, yep, go to Kundalini yoga. And I was like, this is crazy. That's the one kind of tradition that I've really avoided. I've been studying yoga for 17 years, but fine, I'll go. So I went probably like on your birthday last year, like around early November last year, I went to a Kundalini yoga class and I prayed before I went and I said, God, if this is important, if this is something you want me to know about, just make it clear. And in the Shavasana, the relaxation of that class, I had Holy Spirit on me for like 5 minutes, like full body chills up and down, releasing, sobbing, crying, like just felt the presence of God so abundantly. And it was like the most loving, nurturing, like, yeah, there's something here for you. You know what I mean? And I was like, okay, cool. So that changed something in me. And within about 2 months, I could no longer attend church. And it was part of that was I started reading, I read Sue Monk Kidd's book called The Dance of the Dissident Daughter. And she talks about, leaving the Baptist, her dad was a Baptist minister and her husband was a Baptist minister. And she talked about leaving that and then exploring representations of divine feminine cultures in which there was an image O'Day that was feminine. And most of those are very old, but like started reading her book and reading, some other, heretical teachings of other people.
They're the best too,
Right?
People say you're on a slippery slope, and I'm like, but slippery slopes are so much fun.
I know. I'm just like a little penguin on its belly, just sliding down the ice.
Just have a good. Who is not smiling when they're sledding, right?
And so, my pastor, who's a lovely, lovely man, the pastor of this church, kind of kept gently reaching out, like, "Hey, where are you? What's going on? Why aren't you coming to church?" And I eventually had to say to him, I was like, I'm not going to be there for a while. And I said, I'm working through some stuff in my own faith and it's just not a good fit for me to be there right now. And he let that lie for a little while. And then one day we ran into each other in the yard because I live here. You know what I mean? And he was like, what's going on? And I was just in a mood that day and I just let it all out. And I was like, here's the thing. I think that Western Christianity is an instrument of oppression and has been systematically used to oppress the gays and the women and the people of color. And it's also like really enmeshed with like harmful capitalism in ways that I just think are actually not at all what Jesus intended. And basically,
we've not even gotten into the Baptist part of that yet.
Basically, I just think it's all a bunch of shit. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And his face just like went kind of white and big eyes. And he was like, so maybe I could like take you to Starbucks and we could like talk about it. And I was like, I really appreciate that. I was like, right now, I'm also working through this gets into a whole nother can of worms, but the man who led me to Christ, and we use that term, was married to another woman, was involved with me in a sugar daddy, sugar baby relationship, got me pregnant, told me God told him I should have an abortion. So I did. Psychologically manipulated me for multiple years and essentially also encouraged me to date other men for money to support him financially, which was a whole backwards thing because he had a gambling addiction. So I have a massive amount of sexual trauma that's enmeshed with spiritual abuse. Yeah. And that all came to a head with this divine feminine uprising. And I was like, yeah, I just can't right now. You know what I mean? I was like, I just can't right now, and it's a bit complicated, but like, no, you know what I mean? And I think you're great. The church is fine. I have no problem with you. No one there did anything wrong to me, but it's not gonna work for me, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's just a lot. But I mean, there is a lot. There are 2,000 years of misuse of this incredible teacher's teachings that it's harmed a lot of people. So what I want to know from you, because now you're in this office, you're sitting in an office at a church and you do spiritual counseling. And one of the things that you have working through in yourself is healing from systemic religious abuse. and I'm interested in that because I think I'm doing that too. For anyone who found themselves in any part of your story or in any part of what I just shared, where can they start when they feel like there's nowhere that they can go and they can't go to church anymore, but they're just alone? Then they're just alone.
Right.
Like, where do we go? Because that's why I'm like, you know, like, I don't want to use the word obsessed with you because that's too strong of a word, but got so excited about our friendship because I was like, oh my gosh, here's somebody else, a real person near me who's having a similar experience. And like, I'm so thankful for that. So how can we help these people?
Well, and that's kind of like the problem I'm trying to solve in the world, right? Because the term spiritual nomad, I didn't know if that was I don't know if it's a term at all. Whenever I was church planting and I was talking to different leaders who would check in on me, they'd say, so who are the people that you're feeling called to, right? Very, church denominational language, right? And I'm like, you know what? Like the only term that I can use for the people that I connect most with are people who seem like spiritual nomads. And what I mean by that is that they've maybe have been in church, maybe haven't been in church. They feel some sort of connection to God or universe or whatever, but they're a nomad. They're by themselves, seemingly wandering around, trying to put together or pick up on some sort of trail in the wilderness, right? And I just feel like I was connecting with people who are spiritual and deeply connected to the divine, just independently spread out everywhere. And so for people, like me, I was in that situation too. I'm a failed church planter. I only knew a handful of people moving out here. My only other family that I have is like in Laguna Beach. So, I mean, it's not far, but not close, and it's like, what do I do? For me, like it really began with, and not to sound too spiritual about it, but like before I could have any sort of true connection, or before like the universe opened up any doors for any connections with other people, it first began with a reimagining of God in my life and a connecting there first. And it depends on people's personality, how that's going to work for them best. But for me, especially if someone's feeling isolated in their spiritual journey or have dealt with problems in church, we tend to run back to the things that once we've experienced liberation and freedom, we tend to just run back to other forms of oppression, just with a different shade of it. Right. And so the thing is, whenever people are in a vulnerable place, really trying to develop some sort of practice to get down to an identity piece, like what I was talking about. It wasn't until I was really awakened to the deep Christ in me that I was able to have a discerning heart and mind, if you will, to know who I should begin the journey with. Because we can really easily put ourselves in some not life-giving situations with people. So if people are wandering around, I would say like, man, well, first of all, you're listening to this podcast and
yay,
you have people like us, if speaking to the listener, to reach out to. I literally get at least 1 to 3 to 5 DMs a day just from people. Hey, I went through this experience. I like a lot what you said too. There's a lot of people, and I was a youth pastor, and so it doesn't look great on me, but they're like, hey, my youth pastor, sexually assaulted me, or, and it's like, there's so much going on right now, and really just reaching out to people that you sense a sort of security and safety with, and only time will tell if that it's a true, secure and safe, trustworthy individual. But first of all, connecting to the divine yourself, and then reaching out to people who have some sort of track record of, being there for other people. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I guess that's how, I don't know. You tell me, was that helpful for when you started following some of my stuff? Like,
it was super helpful.
reason?
It was super helpful. I mean, I think I had just found something, one of the girls, there was one girl who took my 200-hour spirit-led yoga training, and she's actually the one who referred me to Richard Rohr. And she was the one sitting in the front row or the second row every time I was teaching, who was just nodding and seeing the parallels and understanding. It was like, yes, this is amazing. Like, and that was enough. You know what I mean? One person being like, yeah, I get it, was enough, because I had really wanted to teach these parallels that I was finding, you know, and the fact that these are not mutually exclusive. Like you can practice and explore yoga philosophy, and you can abide in Christ, and they can go together, right? And I believe that still. And then when I found, and she was, you know, she was my student. She lives in Florida, and it was kind of just, she referred me to read Richard Rohr, and I did. I started to subscribe to his newsletter, and I bought one of his books, and then I don't know how I found you. I have no idea. It truly, I have no idea. Like maybe it was a hashtag. Like, I don't know. I really don't know. And it was on social media, and it was just like, I saw a post and I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Like here's someone talking about God in the way that I'm like thinking about God. And it was so affirming. And it was so, like you said, life-giving. And I think that's really important because, you know, like you said, it's very easy, especially when we're seeking to attach to a particular person, and kind of think, well, they know and I don't know, right? And the truth is that you do know.
Yes.
We all know.
Right.
We all have an inner knowing, and it comes from a place of deep listening. And when you can access your way of deep listening, which might be for my husband surfing, like he has deep listening in the ocean. Other people have deep listening walking in nature. Other people can sit in just silence in their own living room and go into deep listening. Others, like Mother Teresa, maybe she found her deep listening in actively serving and helping other people, right? It doesn't necessarily mean sitting in silence. But I do want to speak to anyone who is either, you know, stepped away from the church, or is feeling alone in the church, or is feeling like God is punitive and is punishing you, or feeling like you're going to be punished, or you're going to go to hell, or whatever. If you're feeling like you're vibing with anything that we're throwing down, please know that you're not alone. And that you're not wrong. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken.
The biggest thing, man, is people trying to, you know, they have this sense and this feeling that they're unworthy, they're not enough. And because that is what Western Christianity sells you. That is their way of getting the sale of salvation, is if they can convince you that you are wrong, that you are deeply despicable in the eyes of God. And once you're given this whole, you know, bullshit line of unworthiness, the sale of salvation becomes way easy, because you're like, but I have the ticket for you, my friend, and you picked the right day. Come on down to the front, and you've completely worked them. You've worked them and manipulated them for that to happen. And so for those that have had that sort of experience, I mean, I just want to say I'm sorry that they had that experience, that you had that experience, and that really there is a hopeful road of healing though that happens. And there are other people that are out there, and you're not wrong, and you're not despicable, and you're not and I've had to tell a lot of this to people, even, you know, in the LGBTQ community as well, because it's like, you are not an abomination in the sight of the Lord. You're not. You're a human living, breathe. You used the term imago Dei earlier, which just means in the image of God. And that is enough. And I love Richard Rohr and Naked Now saying that every single person has this Holy Spirit within them. It's just, are they aware of it, you know? And that's all I'm trying to do is help. The problem I'm helping to solve is that people have covered up a true self, the Christ in them, with a false self or ego or a enemy or devil or whatever, you know, mythological, you know, thing you want to put on it. They've covered that up, and they have, because of that, has been forced into a sense of isolation. And whenever they realize that they don't want to put up with that anymore, and trying to create a sense of community around wholeness and love is what I want to try to do. And that's what you're doing.
It's what you are doing.
Yeah.
And I will say this, thank you for your apology. And also, one of the most profound things that I realized about my own relationship with Jesus was that I was in a place where I deeply needed forgiveness. I needed to forgive myself, but that was not accessible. For me to forgive myself was not available at that time. So the fact that I could receive forgiveness from outside of myself was what I needed. And
Yeah.
so even as I look back on it, I wouldn't change anything, because it met a need in me. You know, when we talk about healing trauma, whatever your coping mechanisms are, you don't have to villainize them. They're
Totally.
serving a need, right? Like
Right.
they're working for you in that moment, right? And in
Yeah.
that moment, Jesus's forgiveness, the blood of Christ, me being able to be white as snow, that was working for me. That's what I needed, because I was like,
Yeah.
I am way too fucked up. There's no way I'm going to be able to fix myself. So I can get it here, the fast pass. And that worked. You know what I mean? And so I hope that for everybody listening, that you also know that we are not in any way negating or denying or mocking your deep and true and real experiences
Yeah.
of salvation or of
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of that is like celebrated here. Like, yes
Yeah.
to all of it. Oh my God, I could
Something
talk.
has to be built
Yeah.
first, if I could even say, like, and that recognizing all of that, all of the pieces that, you know, you wouldn't go back and change anything. And even, you know, to piggyback on Richard Rohr again, in order to analyze something or take something apart means something has to be put together in the first place, right? And so for many of us, that is deeply formative to our story. And even though it's painful and, you know, has been hurtful in the past, as we see, all of that makes the individual that is us. And embracing all of those pieces, both light and dark, make the wholeness of who we are. And so I'm in no way, definitely not telling people that their experience was wrong or they shouldn't have had that or anything, but rather to accept that and embrace that as they understand a more expansive view of themselves and of God. Because we wouldn't be able to have an expansive view if we ever had a limiting view. And I'm not saying others have, I'm maybe speaking for us, right? So we've had maybe more of a limiting view. And the only reason we're aware that it's limiting is because those things happened, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you can't know that the box is too small unless you climb into it and try to live there. And then you're like,
Exactly.
this isn't very comfortable. This is a really small box.
Right. You can't break out of something that, you know, if you're not already in that and living into it. So, but yeah, I mean, if people are still in a very Christian or Jesus only sort of framework, I think that that's a totally fine place to be. And I don't know if I even answered your question earlier about that being the only way, but I just would ask that people would begin to do some searching and see a more broader understanding of God that goes beyond any sort of time period, you know, 2,000 years ago, or any people group, i.e. Hebrew people, you know, like zooming out farther will always widen the lens of who is included. And I would say once you zoom out far enough, you'll see that's everyone, you know? So, you know, but it's steps of getting there, and it's, you know, it's pieces of the puzzle that people slowly put together. So, and I've not put them all together yet. So,
well, we'll keep working on the puzzle. So Luke, for anyone listening who is like, I love this, I'm fascinated, I want to learn more, dive in, chew on this a little bit, we like to share a book club pick every week. So is there something that you can recommend that was transformative for you in terms of reading? I know you've shared The Naked Now a couple times, Richard Rohr. Is that the one you would recommend, or is there something else, a good place for people to start?
I'll probably recommend two books that I think are classics, depending on where people are at in their journey. The first that I think would probably be best to even come before Richard Rohr, if people are still in a church setting, or they've come from that perspective. I would recommend Rob Bell's book, Love Wins. I think that book is really helpful in opening up some of the big questions and kind of giving people that first step to a more, I like to use the term expansive theology, right? So Love Wins is that. If you're still in a more conservative church, don't mention the name Rob Bell if you still want to be involved in that church. But in your own time, on your Kindle or whatever, I would read Love Wins. It addresses a lot of things, and it's mostly just posing a question, one main one being like, you know, if God is truly all loving, could there really be a hell, you know? And that's a big one for people, which I do not ascribe to that theology at all. But it's a good, helpful piece for that. Secondly, I would move on to The Naked Now by Richard Rohr, because in that book, I think it's really helping us awaken to more of a sense of oneness. And I would say if people are more still in a church setting, I would argue that's exactly what Jesus was after. In John 17, I promise I won't preach, but I'm just quick tidbit. John 17,
Do it.
Jesus' prayer ultimately ended. It's a long prayer. The third portion of that is that every single person would be connected to the Father as Jesus is connected to the Father. That it's not a through Jesus, it's not us, Jesus, God, but rather an equality. And Jesus says, you'll do even greater things than me. How can you do that unless you have equality? He even says, I now call you brothers and sisters. That's a sort of equality in the, quote, kingdom of God, right? So the whole purpose of the Christian narrative, I think, is oneness with the divine. And we call that Father. That doesn't mean an actual cosmic male dad. It just means that it's this more of an imagery view of this originator of all things in the world. And so that we would walk into in union and in step with the divine. So that's what Richard Rohr's book, I think that's what I got from it. It affirmed John 17, Jesus hoped that we would all be one with God. So love wins and The Naked Now.
I'm for it, man. I'm for it. I think the two, when I'm cherry picking my scripture, when I'm talking to people, the two that I often I do share, is that when Jesus says, I and my Father are one, like I do believe that he's speaking to non-duality, right? And then also greater things than these you will do. And it's a declaration of our access to connection and to authority. And I don't mean authority over other people. I mean this spiritual authority that's inherent within us to figure out your hotline. You know what I mean? To figure out what you're connected to. It's so beautiful. So Luke, I am so grateful to you for the role that you've played in my life and helping move me towards that freedom. Right. And I'm so thankful for you sharing your story and your gifts. And if people want to connect with you further, they can come and visit you on the web at thespiritualnomad.org. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yep. Or hit him up on Instagram. Like he said, his DMs are open, _spiritual_nomad. And listen to his podcast, you guys. There are some incredible episodes on there that just I'm a huge fan. So go listen to the Spiritual Nomad podcast. Luke also offers spiritual coaching. If something that you heard today, activated something in you and you feel like you need a deeper connection or someone to talk to, please hit him up. He's also available for speaking engagements. And you have some really exciting stuff coming out in 2020 about deconstructing, right? You're doing the Deconstructionist Guide to Wholeness, which is going to be a really cool ebook. And also possibly putting together some opportunities for people to connect in real time, digitally, no matter where you are in the world, to be able to dive into this stuff together.
Yep.
Yeah, cool.
That's exactly what it's about.
Yeah. So thank you so much for continuing to create community. I'm coming to church. I'll hit you up about that. Like, where is church? I'm coming.
3 blocks away from you is church.
So, thank you again for your time and just for who you are, for the work that you're doing in the world. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. It's really meaningful. Thank you.
Yeah. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me on another episode of Totally Stoked Podcast. If you love this episode, if it impacted you in some way, please grab a screenshot and share it right now to Instagram stories. Tag Stoked Yogi, #Totally Stoked Podcast. Each week, we'll grab one listener who shared and send you some Stoked Yogi swag. Also, if you love the show, please subscribe, share it with a friend, or head over to iTunes right now and leave us an honest review. Your support and feedback make this show possible. If you have ideas about how we can improve, please send them to podcast@stokedyogi.com. Until next time, you guys, keep showing up, loving people, telling the truth, and remember, keep living your life totally stoked.